Ma'am, I need you to gather your things. This seat has been reassigned. The words came out flat and certain, the way an order sounds when the person giving it has never expected to be questioned. Rachel Holt stood in the aisle of Flight 224, one hand resting on the overhead bin above Seat 1A. Her posture squared, her eyes already moving past the woman in the seat as if the conversation were already finished. The woman in Seat 1. A did not gather her things. She looked up slowly from the paperback novel open on her lap. Her expression did not shift. Her shoulders did not tighten. She simply looked at Rachel Holt the way someone looks at a weather forecast they have seen before and already know how to dress for. "This is my seat," she said. Her name was Diana Owens. She was 46 years old. She was wearing dark jeans, a white blouse, and flat leather shoes that had seen enough miles not to need replacing. She carried no designer bag, no visible jewelry, no assistant trailing behind her with a rolling suitcase. Only a worn canvas tote tucked under the seat in front of her, a boarding pass folded inside her novel as a bookmark, and the kind of stillness that takes decades to build. Rachel blinked once. Then she smiled the professional smile, the one that is not really a smile at all but a management tool. "There appears to have been a system error with your booking," Rachel said. "We are going to need you to move to Seat 2C while we resolve it. It will only take a few minutes." Diana looked at 2C. It was one row back, middle seat, no window. Still first class technically. But the message was not technical. "I will wait while you resolve it," Diana said. "Right here." Rachel's smile did not waver. "I understand, but for the comfort of all passengers during the boarding process." "I am not uncomfortable," Diana said, "and I am not moving." It was said without heat, without volume, without any of the emotional markers that would have made it easier to dismiss. It landed the way a door being locked sounds, final mechanical, requiring no further discussion. Rachel looked at her for one more second. Then she said, "I'll need to check with my supervisor," and walked back toward the galley with the careful pace of someone who wants to appear unhurried. The boarding door was still open. Passengers filtered through the jet bridge in the way passengers always do. Rolling bags, phone screens, the particular exhaustion of people who travel too much or not enough. Most of them did not look up. Most of them never do. But some did. In row 4, a man named Thomas Rivera settled into his window seat and immediately noticed. He was 41, broad-shouldered, with a filmmaker's eye for the geometry of a scene, where the power was, where the pressure was being applied, who was standing over whom. He had been making documentary films for 15 years. He had filmed labor disputes, border crossings, school board meetings that turned into something else entirely. He knew what this looked like before he could have articulated why. He opened his phone. He did not post anything. He positioned the camera, quietly angled it toward the front of the cabin, and let it run. Across the aisle from Seat 1, a woman named Nora Okafor had been settled into her seat for 10 minutes already. She was 55 with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had brought 3 books for a 2-hour flight, which was a habit formed over 25 years as a federal judge where waiting was something you prepared for. She had set her book down the moment Rachel Holt opened her mouth. She had not picked it up again. Her eyes had not left Diana's face. She did not speak yet. She watched. That was another habit. You watch first. You learn what the situation actually is before you decide what it requires of you. Behind them, toward the middle of the boarding stream, came Marcus Webb. He was 52 with silver cufflinks and the kind of blazer that costs more than some people's rent. He was on his phone when he boarded, loudly, the way men who consider their conversations important tend to be loud in shared spaces. He passed Diana's row and glanced at her the way people glance at things that register as unexpected. Not a long look, not a spoken word, just a flicker of something that settled behind his eyes and stayed there. He continued to seat 2A and lowered himself into it with the ease of someone who has never once questioned whether a space belonged to him. Near the galley, a junior flight attendant named Sandra Pierce stood beside the service cart and watched Rachel return. Sandra was 34 with careful eyes and the practiced neutrality of someone who has learned that the safest position on any team is slightly to the side. She watched Rachel's face for information and adjusted her own expression accordingly. Rachel said something low. Sandra nodded. Sandra glanced toward seat 1A. Then she looked at her shoes. Elena Vargas came through the galley from the other direction, carrying a stack of blanket packages for the overhead storage. She was 29, with her hair pulled back and the quick, efficient movement of someone who genuinely liked her job and was good at it. She had been working Altitude Airways flights for 4 years. She had earned every good review she had ever received. She slowed as she passed row 1. She saw the woman in seat 1A. She saw the way Rachel was standing at the galley entrance watching. She kept moving, but she looked back once over her shoulder at the woman sitting perfectly still in the window seat with a novel on her lap. Diana was not reading. She was looking out the window at the tarmac below at the morning light bouncing off the concrete at a ground crew member in orange vests guiding another aircraft away from the gate. Her expression was composed. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked to anyone watching like a woman who had decided something and was waiting for the world to catch up with her decision, which was exactly what she was. Diana Owens had built Altitude Airways from a business plan she wrote at a kitchen table in Atlanta when she was 28 years old. She had pitched it to 11 banks before one said yes. She had hired the first 40 employees herself, had personally approved the paint design on the first 6 planes in the fleet, had been present at the gate for the inaugural flight on a Tuesday morning 18 years ago, when the terminal was half empty, and her hands would not stop shaking. She was now the founder, chief executive officer, and majority shareholder of the airline. The planes belonged to her. The uniforms belonged to her. The route from this city to the next was a route her operations team had mapped and her legal team had filed for, and her finance team had greenlit 3 years ago. Seat 1A on this flight on any Altitude Airways flight belonged to her, in ways that Rachel Holt had not yet begun to consider. But Diana had not come on this flight to exercise ownership. She had come as a passenger. Alone, unannounced, without the advance call to the gate manager or the silent escort to pre-boarding that usually accompanied her when she traveled on company routes. She had come this way on purpose, and she had done it because of a letter. A letter from a woman named Greta James, 63 years old, who had written to Altitude Airways corporate 3 months ago, describing how she had been asked, 3 times with increasing firmness, to verify her first-class ticket on a flight she had paid for in full, while the passengers around her were never asked anything at all. The letter was polite, meticulous. Greta James had included her booking confirmation, her bank statement, and the name of the flight attendant who had questioned her. The name on the letter was Rachel Holt. Diana had read it on a Monday morning and had not set it down for a long time. Now she sat in seat 1A with a paperback novel and a canvas tote bag and watched the tarmac and waited for Rachel Holt to come back. The boarding door closed with a pressurized thud. The cabin settled. Diana turned a page of the book she was not reading. Rachel came back with Sandra Pierce beside her. 2 bodies where there had been one, the arithmetic of authority. Double the presence, double the implication that compliance is the only reasonable response. Rachel's professional smile was still in place. Sandra's expression was carefully neutral, which is a different thing from calm. Neutral means you have decided not to have a visible opinion. Calm means you actually do not have one. Sandra was not calm. Her eyes moved to the seat to Diana, to the tray table, and back to Rachel with the rhythm of someone taking cues. "Ma'am." Rachel said, her voice carrying the particular gentleness that people use when they want to sound like they are helping you while they are doing the opposite. I have looked into the situation, and I am afraid there is a complication with your booking. What complication? Diana said. Your ticket appears to have been purchased through a third-party booking system. Our terminal is having difficulty verifying the transaction, and until it can be confirmed, we are not able to guarantee the seat. Diana set her novel face down on her lap. Who purchased the ticket through a third-party system? That is what we are trying to determine. I purchased my ticket directly through the Altitude Airways website 6 weeks ago. I have the confirmation number, the transaction record, and the boarding pass that was issued by this airline. Which of those would you like to see? Rachel's smile held. I understand. But the system issued me a boarding pass, Diana said. That is what systems do when a transaction is valid. A silence fell between them. Not empty. Loaded. The kind of silence that happens when one person's logic has met a wall that logic cannot move, because the wall was never built on logic to begin with. Rachel placed a piece of paper on Diana's tray table. Diana looked at it without touching it. It was a seat reassignment form, printed, official-looking. Row 14. Seat B, economy class. Middle seat. No window 43 rows from where Diana was currently sitting. Not a different first-class seat. Economy. The other side of the curtain. You are asking me to move to economy, Diana said. Until the booking can be verified, yes. As a courtesy measure. For whom Rachel did not answer that. This isn't personal, ma'am, she said instead. Diana looked at the form for a moment. Then she looked at Rachel. Then it should be very easy to verify. Call the booking system directly. I will wait. The system is experiencing limited access at the moment. Then we will wait together until it is restored. From across the aisle, a book closed with an audible snap. Nora Okafor did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply looked at Rachel Holt with the steady attention of a woman who had spent 25 years assessing the credibility of statements made under pressure. Young lady, Nora said, I have been sitting here since before this passenger boarded. I have watched her present her boarding pass, provide her name, and take her assigned seat without incident. I would like to understand precisely what the problem with her ticket is. Rachel turned. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is a private matter between the airline and... I am on this aircraft, Nora said. That makes it my environment. I am not concerned. I am curious. What specifically is wrong with her ticket? It was a simple question. It had a simple answer if the answer existed. Rachel could have said the third-party system shows a discrepancy in the payment timestamp, or the seat was double-booked and she drew the short end, or any number of things that would have been specific, verifiable, and arguable. Rachel said, We are working to determine that. Nora looked at her for one more moment, then looked away, which in its own way said everything. In row 4, Thomas Rivera had not moved his camera. His phone rested on his knee at an angle that made it look casual. He had been filming for 11 minutes. He had captured Rachel's approach, the reassignment slip being placed on the tray, Nora's intervention, Rachel's non-answer. His thumb moved to draft a post. A still image, the slip visible on the tray table, Diana's hands folded in her lap beside it, and then stopped. Not yet. He wanted more. He wanted the part that came after. He set the draft aside and kept filming. Behind Diana, Marcus Webb shifted in seat 2A. He had ended his phone call during the Nora exchange. Now he sat with his hands loose on the armrests, watching the scene at row 1 with an expression he would have called patient, but which was closer to entertained. He adjusted his cufflinks with the small, precise motion of a man who uses objects to communicate that his time is being spent on something beneath him. Sandra Pierce stood at Rachel's shoulder and held the service tablet against her chest. The tablet was connected to the passenger manifest system. If she had opened the booking screen and searched the name Diana Owens, she would have found what she already suspected was there. She did not open it. She looked at the floor and redistributed her weight from one foot to the other. Elena Vargas came through the first-class section again, this time with a water service tray. She slowed as she reached row 1. Her eyes moved to the slip of paper on the tray table, then to Diana, then to Rachel. She opened her mouth, and the breath was already there, the words already forming. Rachel looked at her. One look. Quick and flat, and carrying very clear information about what would happen to junior flight attendants who inserted themselves into situations they had not been invited into. Elena closed her mouth. She continued down the aisle with her water tray, but she looked back. She looked back at Diana the way you look back at someone you have left standing in the rain. "Miss Holt," Diana said. Rachel's attention returned to her. "If you are unable to verify my booking before we depart, I would suggest you note the discrepancy in the flight log, provide me with the customer relations contact for follow-up, and allow me to remain in my seat for the duration of the flight, as I am a paying passenger with a valid boarding pass. I am not able to do that until the booking is confirmed." "Then confirm it." "The system is not down," Diana said quietly. "We both know that." The words were not an accusation. They were quieter than that. They were an observation stated plainly, offered without decoration. The kind of thing that is more difficult to argue with than an accusation because there is no heat in it to push against. Rachel's smile shifted. Not disappeared, shifted into something slightly less practiced and slightly more rigid. "Ma'am, I am going to need to involve the captain if you continue to be uncooperative." "I am not being uncooperative," Diana said. "I am being still. Those are different things. Please involve the captain." Rachel straightened. She looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at the floor. Rachel walked toward the cockpit. The economy reassignment slip sat on Diana's tray table like something that had been placed in the wrong century. Diana looked at it for a moment. She did not pick it up. She did not move it. She simply registered it the way you register a thing that is factually wrong, but temporarily present, knowing that the world has a way of correcting its factual errors if you give it enough time and do not flinch. She picked up her novel, found her page, began to read. Or appeared to. Nora Okafor looked at the back of Diana's head for a long moment. Then she picked up her own book and found her own page. Across the aisle in seat 2, a Marcus Webb watched the two women reading their books. Something moved across his face. Not recognition. Something shorter than that. He looked away. The slip of paper sat on the tray. Nobody touched it. The paper on the tray became for a moment another piece of paper in another place. Diana was 24 years old, and the paper was a business plan in a black folder that she had printed twice because she did not trust the first copy to be good enough. She was on a regional carrier heading back to Atlanta from a meeting in Charlotte. The meeting had gone well, better than she had expected, which was itself a strange thing to experience because she had expected it to go very well. The investor had nodded in the right places. He had asked sharp questions. He had said at the end in a conference room on the 18th floor of a building with real art on the walls that he would be in touch. She did not know yet that he would not be in touch. That was a lesson that came later. For now, she was on the plane with the business plan on her lap and the particular lightheadedness of someone who has just had a glimpse of the future they have been building toward. She was wearing her best blazer. She had bought it specifically for investor meetings, which meant she had bought it specifically for this. It was navy. It made her feel like the person the business plan described. The flight attendant had come through economy 3 times. The first time she had skipped row 12 entirely. Diana had assumed she was starting somewhere else and would circle back. The second time she had paused at row 11, then moved past Diana to row 13. The third time, Diana had raised her hand. The flight attendant looked at her the way people look at things they were hoping would stop existing. Economy service is finished, ma'am. Diana looked around. There were passengers in rows 14 through 22 who had not been served. She could see empty hands, turned heads, the slightly puzzled expression of people waiting for something that should have come by now. "There are passengers behind me who haven't been served yet," Diana said. "We're finishing up. Then you skipped me." The attendant, white woman, late 40s with tired eyes and a voice that had given up on warmth, looked at Diana's tray. "Did you order something? No. But I would have if anyone had asked. You can press the call button." And she was gone, already past row 14, already moving. Diana looked at the call button. She thought about pressing it. She decided with the clarity of a person who has already had one important thing go right that day that she was not going to press it. She was not going to spend energy on that. She was going to use the energy for something else. She opened the business plan, found a blank page at the back. She always left several for exactly this kind of moment. She wrote in the careful handwriting she used when she was certain something mattered. "One day, nobody on my plane will be invisible." It was not a dramatic thought. It was not a battle cry. It was a quiet promise made to no one who could hear it in the back of a regional plane by a woman in a navy blazer who had a business plan in a black folder and a meeting that had gone better than expected. She was 46 now. The promise was 22 years old. She had built a fleet of 41 aircraft. She had opened routes to 23 cities. She had hired a team of 4,000 people and had personally signed off on the language in the customer service charter. Every word, every line, the part about dignity most of all. She had kept the promise. She looked at the economy reassignment slip on the tray table. The plastic tray made a small sound as the plane adjusted its position on the jet bridge, a soft papery shift, like a page turning. Diana looked up. The cabin was still boarding. Rachel had not returned yet. She looked back at the slip. Row 14, seat B, economy, middle seat. 22 years, she thought. She did not say it. She did not write it. She simply held it for a moment and then let it go the way you let go of a thing that you need your hands free to deal with what comes next. She found her page in the novel. She kept her hands steady. Captain Brett Calloway was 50 years old, silver-haired with the square-shouldered posture of a man who had spent 3 decades being the most authoritative person in any room he entered. He walked the aisle of first class with his hands clasped behind his back, slowly enough to convey that he was not alarmed, but with purpose enough to convey that he was handling something. He had not come to investigate. Diana understood this the moment she saw him. He had come to resolve, which is a different thing. Resolution in his frame meant the situation returning to baseline. The baseline was passenger and assigned seat crew operating without disruption, flight departing on schedule. The fastest path from here to that baseline from his perspective was the passenger moving. He bent slightly toward seat 1A, bringing his voice down to a register that was meant to feel private but carried perfectly in a quiet first-class section. "Ma'am, we have a situation with your booking. I am going to ask you to cooperate with my crew so we can get this flight in the air." "I am cooperating," Diana said. "I am sitting in my seat. Our flight attendant has flagged a discrepancy." "What discrepancy specifically?" Brett paused. His mouth opened slightly and then adjusted, searching for the information that should have been waiting there. He had spoken to Rachel before entering the cabin. Rachel had told him there was a booking issue with a passenger in 1A who was being uncooperative. He had taken that summary and walked out here. He had not asked what the discrepancy was. He realized now, standing in the aisle with Diana Owens, looking at him with calm brown eyes, that this was a problem. Rachel was behind him. He could feel her there. He could not turn to ask her now because that would show the cabin that he had come out here without the information required to hold this position. "The specific nature of the discrepancy is what we are working to clarify," he said. Then perhaps you should clarify it before asking me to move, Diana said. She reached into her canvas tote. She removed a folded sheet of paper. Her booking confirmation printed with the flight number, seat number, ticket class, full name, and transaction total visible in clean black print. She placed it on the tray table beside the economy reassignment slip, 2 pieces of paper, side by side, one with her name, her seat, her paid amount, her confirmation number, one telling her to go sit in row 14. There is no discrepancy, Diana said. She did not tap the confirmation. She did not wave it. She simply let it exist on the tray table and said, "There is a decision someone made when they looked at me. And I am asking you as the captain of this flight to look at both of these papers and tell me which one represents a discrepancy." Brett looked at both papers. He was quiet for a moment. From seat 2, a 1 row back, Marcus Webb leaned forward. "Captain." His voice had the practiced volume of a man accustomed to conference rooms where he speaks and others adjust. "Some of us have connections to catch. Perhaps we can sort the paperwork on the ground and get moving." He paused and then added, not quite under his breath, but with the precision of someone who has calibrated the exact decibel level at which something can be said and later denied. People hold up flights for the strangest reasons these days. The woman in row 3, white mid-40s with a coffee cup she had brought on from the terminal, looked up. She looked at Marcus. Then she looked at Diana. Her expression was not complicated. Nora Okafor turned her head and looked at Marcus Webb with the steady attention of a woman who has spent her career watching people reveal themselves through the things they say when they think no one is scoring. Marcus met her gaze. He looked away first. From the galley, Elena Vargas appeared with a water service tray. She was moving along the standard route first-class window seats, first, then aisle. She reached row 1 and slowed. Her eyes went to the tray table, to both pieces of paper, the confirmation and the reassignment slip sitting there like exhibits at a hearing. Her gaze moved to Diana, then to Brett, then to Rachel standing just behind Brett's shoulder. Something moved across Elena's face. Not hesitation exactly, more like the moment before a decision when all the possible outcomes are still in play. She took a breath. Rachel's eyes found Elena. The look was brief. It did not contain a threat in any word that could be repeated. It contained only information: this is not your situation. Do not make it your situation. Elena exhaled. She set a glass of water on the tray in row 2 and continued down the aisle. She did not speak, but she looked back. One look over her shoulder at Diana sitting in seat 1A, the kind of look that carries an apology in it. Brett made a decision. It was the decision of a man trying to thread a needle he was not sure was threadable. "Ma'am, in the interest of getting this flight underway, you are welcome to remain in 1A for the duration of the flight. However, your ticket will be flagged for review, and there will be follow-up upon landing if the discrepancy cannot be resolved." "What follow-up?" Diana said. "That will depend on the review." "I see," Diana said. "You are telling me that I may keep my seat today, but that I should expect consequences for sitting in it." "That is not what I understand consequences very well," Diana said. "Thank you, Captain." Brett looked at her for a moment. Then he straightened. He looked at Rachel. He gave a small nod that was meant to communicate something between them and walked back toward the cockpit. Rachel lingered. She looked at the 2 pieces of paper on the tray. She reached out and picked up the economy reassignment slip. She folded it and took it with her. The booking confirmation remained on the tray. Diana looked at it. She did not pick it up. She left it where it was. Visible, present, factual. In row 4, Tomas Rivera caught the eye of the man in row 6. The man in row 6 had been watching the whole exchange with his phone at half-mast, not quite filming, but not quite not filming either. He mouthed something at Tomas. Tomas lip-read it. "Are you getting this?" Tomas nodded once. He was getting all of it. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew you were right, but felt like no one around you could see it? If that question landed somewhere personal, drop a comment below and tell me your story. And if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of what they look like or what they are wearing, hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with me, because this is only getting started. 20 minutes into the flight, altitude cruising, the seatbelt sign had clicked off. The sky outside was the particular pale blue of early morning at elevation, clean and indifferent and very far from any of the things happening inside the cabin. Rachel Holt came back down the aisle. She had Sandra with her again, but this time her voice was different. Lower in pitch, but higher in carrying power, the way voices become when a person has decided that the performance of authority requires an audience. "Ma'am." She stopped at row 1. She did not lower her voice to create privacy. She raised it just enough to ensure that the first 4 rows heard her clearly. "Our system has now flagged your payment as potentially fraudulent. I need to see a second form of identification." The word landed in the first class section the way a tray drops in a silent kitchen. Everyone heard it. Everyone looked up. The man in row 5 stopped typing. The woman in row 3 set down her coffee cup. Tomas Rivera's camera was at full attention without any adjustment on his part. Nora Okafor went very still. Not the stillness of shock, the stillness of recognition, the particular stillness of a person who has heard a word weaponized before and knows immediately what it is doing in this sentence. Diana did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at the passengers around her. She looked at Rachel. "You just accused me of fraud," Diana said. "In front of these people." I said potentially. "It is a standard protocol. Show me the written policy that requires mid-flight identity verification based on a potential payment flag." Rachel's expression held, but her hands, clasped in front of her at the waist, adjusted their grip. "The policy is in our operational guidelines." "Quote it for me," Diana said. "The specific section. The specific language." There was no section. There was no specific language, because there was no policy. Rachel had framed a decision as a protocol, which is something people do when they need a decision to sound inevitable. Sandra Pierce stood at Rachel's shoulder, holding her service tablet. The booking screen was right there. It had been right there for 40 minutes. Diana Owens. Seat 1. A full first-class fare. Verified transaction 0 flags. 0. Sandra had seen it the first time she opened the manifest. She was looking at the floor now. Her thumb was pressed against the edge of the tablet, hard enough to whiten the skin around the nail. She did not turn the screen toward Rachel. She did not say anything. From seat 2, a Marcus Webb stood up, not fully. A hybrid position half-risen, projecting his voice into the space between standing and sitting the way practiced boardroom talkers do when they want to seem both casual and commanding. "Captain, is the captain available? Look, I travel this route every week. I know what a disruption looks like, and I know what a valid first-class cabin looks like. This has taken long enough. Maybe let's get this resolved so the rest of us aren't delayed further." He paused. He adjusted his jacket. Then, at a volume he had calculated to be just below the threshold of clear quotation, he added, "Some situations have a straightforward answer if everyone's willing to be reasonable." The woman in row 3 looked at him. Her coffee cup was in her hand, and she did not put it down. "She's been sitting in that seat since before we took off," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. "What part of that is the situation?" Marcus turned to look at her. He seemed briefly surprised that she had spoken. "I wasn't addressing you," he said. "I know," she said. She did not look away. Tomas Rivera's thumb moved. He was posting now. Not the video, not yet. A single still image he had captured 14 minutes ago. Diana in seat 1. A posture, straight hands folded the economy reassignment slip visible on the tray table, Rachel standing over her. He wrote a single line of caption, Flight 2241. Watch what this airline does next. He tagged the flight number. He tagged the airline. He did not need to say anything else. He watched the share count begin. Rachel redirected her attention to Diana. Ma'am, I need your compliance. If you are unwilling to provide a second form of identification, I am authorized to remove you from this aircraft. Diana looked at her for a long, unhurried moment. Long enough that the cabin felt it. Long enough that 2 passengers in row 6 exchanged a glance and looked back. You have my compliance, Diana said. You do not have my seat. She reached into her canvas tote. The cabin watched her hand move. In the way that all movement becomes significant in a tense room, the simple action of reaching into a bag became an event. Tomas held his angle. The man in row 5 leaned slightly forward. Diana removed her phone. She dialed a number. She held the phone to her ear. She spoke quietly. Not in a whisper. Diana Owens did not whisper. But at a volume calibrated for the person on the other end, not the room. Camille. It's happening. Start the log. On the other end of the call, in the Altitude Airways headquarters building in Atlanta on the 14th floor, Camille Ross was already at her desk. She was 33 years old, efficient in the way that only people who genuinely love their work become efficient, and she had been waiting for this call since Diana had told her 2 days ago that she was flying Flight 2241 anonymously, and she wanted backup ready. Camille's voice came back through the phone, steady and calibrated. Already running, Diana. What do you need? Rachel stared at Diana. At the phone. At Diana again. For the first time, something in Rachel's expression moved that was not the professional smile and was not the management tool. Something smaller and faster and harder to categorize. Who are you calling? She said. Diana did not answer. She was listening to Camille, her expression unchanged, her free hand resting flat and still on her novel in her lap. Rachel looked at Sandra. Sandra was looking at her tablet screen. Sandra's face was the face of someone who has been standing next to something that is becoming more wrong with every passing minute and does not know how to step back without making it more wrong by stepping back. Rachel straightened her jacket. She looked at the first class section, at the phones, at the faces turned toward her, at Nora Okafor across the aisle, watching with the patient attention of someone who is building a record. She turned and walked back toward the galley. Diana said into the phone, "Give me a few minutes. Stay on." "I'm here," Camille said. Diana set the phone face up on the tray table beside her booking confirmation. Camille's name glowed on the screen. The call was live, the timer running in small green numbers. Nora Okafor looked at the phone on the tray, then at Diana's face. Something in Nora's expression shifted. A small recalibration, the way a retired judge's expression shifts when a piece of evidence clarifies what had previously been only a well-grounded suspicion. She said nothing. She picked up her book. She did not read it. The word fraudulent had a specific texture when you had heard it applied to yourself before. Diana was 31. She had just finalized the acquisition of a 6-plane regional carrier based in Atlanta, a small operation aging fleet 2 unprofitable routes, and a ground crew that needed everything updated. It was the first real asset of what would become Altitude Airways, and she had spent 14 months negotiating for it, 4 of those months surviving on a level of financial stress she did not discuss with anyone. On the day the acquisition closed, she flew on her own airline for the first time. She chose economy on purpose. She wanted to see what the experience was from where most people sat. She wore the same kind of clothes she always wore. Dark jeans, a blouse, clean shoes. She sat in row 14. She had a window seat, and she spent the first 20 minutes of the flight looking out at the Atlanta skyline, getting smaller, and thinking with an astonishment that she was careful not to let show on her face. This is mine. This is actually mine. She heard the flight attendant before she saw her. The woman was in the galley talking to her colleague in the lowered voice of a person who believes she is out of earshot. She was not. "Did you see who's in 14C? Apparently, she's the new owner." A pause. The sound of something being restocked. "No way. She doesn't look like..." The sentence ended there. Not finished. Not corrected. Just stopped hanging in the galley air like something that had been said and then recognized as unsayable. Diana sat in row 14 and looked out the window at the clouds. She doesn't look like. She had been in enough rooms to know how the sentence ended. She had been in those rooms for her whole career. The bank offices, the investor meetings, the industry conferences where she was sometimes the only black woman present and always one of very few. She knew the sentence. She had heard its close relatives in every register, from the dismissive to the apologetic to the carefully phrased. She had learned to take the part of the sentence that was said and hear the part that wasn't, and then to decide each time what to do with it. That night in her hotel room in Atlanta, she wrote the company's first internal policy document. It was 1 page. She wrote it in 35 minutes and then read it back twice. The language at the top of the page was simple enough to say aloud without stumbling direct enough to mean exactly one thing. Every passenger boards with dignity. No exceptions. She had presented it at the first all-staff meeting 3 weeks later. She had read it aloud herself, standing at the front of a conference room that smelled like new paint because the office had just been set up. She had watched the 40 people she had just hired listen to it, and she had meant every word. She had included it in every annual training document since. She had referenced it in speeches in press interviews in the orientation package that every new employee received on their first day. She wondered now, sitting in seat 1A, whether Rachel Holt had ever read it. She wondered whether Rachel had read it and simply decided it applied to certain passengers and not others. Whether she had read it and found some way to make the exceptions that the policy said did not exist, or whether she had never read it at all. Camille's voice came through the phone on the tray table, soft and steady. "Still here, Diana." Diana's hand tightened slightly around the novel in her lap. Not a grip, just a gathering, the small physical act of collecting yourself before what comes next. "I know," she said. "Stay on." She looked at her booking confirmation, still sitting where she had placed it on the tray. Her name in clean black print, her seat number, her transaction amount. She doesn't look like. 22 years ago, she had finished a sentence someone else had left hanging, and she had built an airline around the ending. The plane hummed beneath her. She was ready. Marcus Webb unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, not the half-standing, one arm on the rest posture from before, fully upright. He straightened his jacket, ran one hand down his lapel, and walked the 3 steps forward from seat 2A to the front of the first-class section with the ease of a man moving through a space he has decided belongs to him. He positioned himself beside Rachel, not behind her, not across from her. Beside her, one shoulder in line with hers in the implicit geography of alliance. Brett Calloway had reappeared from the cockpit. He stood in the forward door area, arms crossed, jaw set. He had the expression of a man who was hoping the situation would have resolved itself by the time he emerged and was adjusting to the fact that it had not. Marcus addressed him directly. "Captain, I think the situation here is fairly clear. There is a disputed booking. The passenger has declined to cooperate with the resolution process." He spread his hands in the gesture of a man being reasonable on behalf of everyone. "I have been in premium cabin situations before, where this kind of confusion causes significant delays for other passengers. I think we all know what the most efficient path forward looks like." Brett nodded slowly. He did not ask what the most efficient path looked like. He did not have to. Marcus had made it clear by his presence in the aisle and his position beside the lead flight attendant. Diana had been watching this. She turned to look at Marcus Webb directly. He had not addressed her. He had spoken about her to the captain with the fluid ease of someone who has learned that addressing people directly gives them an opportunity to respond. "Mr. Webb," Diana said. Marcus looked at her. A slight adjustment behind the eyes. The recalibration of a man who has been addressed by the person he was discussing. "You are a passenger on this flight. You have a seat. You do not have a role in this conversation. I was speaking to the captain. I am aware of who you were speaking to. I am telling you that you have no standing in a booking dispute between a passenger and crew. Sit down, please." The first-class section heard this. Someone in row 3, not the woman with the coffee cup, someone behind her, exhaled a small involuntary breath. The kind of breath that comes out when something you were hoping someone would say finally gets said. Marcus looked at her. His jaw moved slightly. He was not accustomed to being told to sit down. He was especially not accustomed to being told to sit down by a woman in jeans and a white blouse who had no visible markers of authority. "I was simply trying to help resolve." "You are not resolving anything," Diana said. Her voice had not changed pitch. Not 1 degree warmer, not 1 degree colder. "You are extending it." Brett shifted his weight. Marcus stood for one more moment in the calculation of whether to press the point and then made the decision that many people make in the presence of that particular kind of certainty, the kind that does not need volume because it has something stronger underneath it. He did not sit, but he stopped talking, and he took one small step back. It was not surrender, but it was information. Captain Rachel said, redirecting, "Perhaps we can discuss the formal removal option at this point." Brett looked at Rachel, then at Diana, then at the booking confirmation still sitting on Diana's tray table. "What does the manifest say?" he asked. He had not asked this before. He was asking it now because standing in front of Diana Owens for the 3rd time, he was beginning to understand that not having asked it before was a problem he would have to account for. Rachel did not answer immediately. Sandra Pierce was standing 2 steps back from the group tablet in hand. She had been in that position for the last several minutes. The tablet screen, if anyone had thought to look at it, was open to the passenger manifest. Diana Owens, Seat 1. A full first-class fare verified 0 flags. Sandra had been looking at that screen and then at the floor, and then at the screen again in a cycle that had been running for the better part of 20 minutes. Marcus Webb was not finished. He moved slightly toward Diana's row, not aggressively but too close, into the zone of personal space that people enter when they want to use proximity as pressure. "Look," he said, dropping his voice just enough to create the fiction of a private conversation in a public space. "I have been in situations like this. I travel extensively. I know how these things work. The airline will offer you a travel voucher, rebook you for the next available flight. Probably an upgrade in economy. These things happen. It is not personal. But continuing to hold up this flight is not going to benefit you." He looked at her with the expression of someone who believes he is being generous. Nora Okafor set her water glass down on her tray table. The sound was deliberate, precise, the click of glass on plastic in a quiet space. She looked at Marcus Webb. "Did you just suggest," she said, her voice carrying the particular clarity of someone who has spent decades in rooms where precision of language was the difference between justice and its absence, "that she should accept a voucher and sit in economy in exchange for giving up a first-class seat she paid for?" Marcus turned to her. "I was speaking to—" "I heard who you were speaking to," Nora said. "I am speaking to you. Answer the question." The man in row 5 had fully abandoned any pretense of looking at his laptop. The woman in row 3 picked up her coffee cup again, slowly, her eyes on Marcus. Marcus adjusted his tie. It was a small movement, but it was not nothing. I was offering a practical solution to a situation that has gone on long enough. A practical solution, Nora said, in which the person who is in the right loses her seat, loses her class of service, accepts a credit in place of what she paid for, and vacates the space so that everyone can move on comfortably. She paused. I have heard that argument before. It was not practical then either. Marcus opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He walked back to seat 2A and sat down. In row 4, Tomas Rivera saw his post notification 4,000 shares in 11 minutes. The comments were running fast. He read the top 3. Name the airline. Is this real? Someone in that cabin needs to speak up. He tilted his phone slightly, widened his angle to include more of the front section, and kept filming. Sandra Pierce looked at Rachel. Her tablet was still in her hands. She turned the screen slightly, not showing it, not hiding it, just shifting the angle. Her thumb moved over the surface, and for a moment she held Rachel's booking screen and Diana's booking record side by side in split view. Verified. 0 flags. Full fare. 6 weeks prior. She looked at it. She had been looking at it for 20 minutes. She closed the split view and held the tablet against her chest. Her face had changed. Something had shifted behind her eyes. Not a decision yet, but the ground that decisions are made on. Diana had not moved, had not raised her voice, had not appealed to the passengers around her or performed distress for the cameras that were no longer hidden. She sat in seat 1A and she was the calmest person on the plane. And somehow that was the most powerful thing in the room. Elena Vargas had done 4 passes through first class in the last 30 minutes. Drink refills, blanket requests. A passenger in row 6 who needed a bag for his wet umbrella. The ordinary fabric of a flight attendant's work, which continues regardless of what else is happening in the cabin because the work does not pause for situations. But Elena had been listening. She had heard every exchange, Rachel's escalating language, Brett's non-questions, Marcus Webb's boardroom diplomacy, Nora Okafor's precise dismantling of it. She had heard the word fraudulent and had watched Diana Owens not flinch. She came through the front of the first-class section on her 5th pass, moving from the galley toward row 6 with a bottle of still water. She slowed at row 1. She looked at the tablet Sandra was holding. Sandra had moved slightly, and the screen was at a readable angle. Elena read what was on it. She had seen this system her entire career. She knew what 0 flags meant. She knew what verified meant. She knew what a fully paid first-class fare looked like, and she knew that the screen Sandra was holding showed exactly that. She stopped. She looked at Rachel, who was standing near the forward galley entrance. She looked at Diana sitting in seat 1A with the booking confirmation, and her phone on the tray, and her novel in her lap. She made a choice. Miss Holt. Her voice was even. She used Rachel's surname because that made it formal, which made it serious, which made it the kind of thing that gets remembered. Rachel turned. I have checked the passenger manifest, Elena said. The booking for seat 1A is valid, fully paid, no flags on the transaction. The first-class section went quiet in the specific way that a room goes quiet when someone has said something that changes the shape of the conversation. Rachel looked at Elena. Her expression did not change in any way that could be described in a complaint form, but something in it became very still. Elena, she said. I thought you should know, Elena said in case there had been a misunderstanding. Step to the galley. Now. Elena went. She was a professional and she went. But before she turned, she met Diana's eyes. It was not a long look. A second, maybe less. But it was direct and it was complete, and it said without any ambiguity, I see you. I know what is happening. I am sorry it took me this long. Diana gave her the smallest nod. The first-class section watched Elena walk to the galley. They watched Rachel follow. They could not hear what was said. Rachel's voice was low and fast, and she was positioned with her back to the cabin. But they could see it through the partial partition, the proximity, the pace of Rachel's speech, Elena's stillness, the way Sandra stood to the side and looked at the galley wall. They could read a conversation without its words. Elena came back out. Her face was composed. Her hands were not. There was a small controlled tremor in her right hand as she continued with the water service moving to row 6, row 5, row 4. She did not look at Rachel. She did not look at Diana. She continued her work with the focused attention of someone who has made a choice and is living with it. In row 1 across the aisle, Nora Okafor leaned very slightly toward Diana and said quietly, "That young woman just put her job on the line for you." Diana was watching Elena's back. "I know," she said. "She did it anyway." "Yes," Diana said. "She did." Marcus Webb from seat 2A, so the junior attendant has now diagnosed the booking system. Outstanding. This is a remarkably well-run operation. Elena stopped walking. She was at row 3. She did not turn around. She did not look at Marcus Webb. She adjusted the water bottle in her hand and continued to row 4, and offered Tomas Rivera still or sparkling with the same professional neutrality she had been offering beverages with for the past hour. Tomas said still. He watched Elena's hands. The right one was still faintly trembling. He noted it. He would note it in the post later. The way some courage shakes while it's happening. Brett Calloway came back out of the cockpit. He was holding a piece of paper, another one, another seat reassignment form. He had generated it himself, which meant he had gone into the cockpit and produced a document without ever asking to see the manifest. He approached Diana's tray table and placed it beside the booking confirmation. The tray table now held 3 pieces of paper. The booking confirmation. The call to Camille live timer still running. And now the second reassignment form, different format from Rachel's captain, issued with Brett's employee number at the bottom. 3 pieces of paper. It had become almost absurd. Brett straightened. "Ma'am, this is a formal written notice. If you do not comply with the seat reassignment as directed by crew, we are authorized to—" Diana raised one hand, a single flat gesture, fingers together, palm forward. Brett stopped. Diana lowered her hand. "Before you finish that sentence," she said, "I want you to understand something. I know my rights as a passenger on this airline. I know your operating policies in more detail than you have demonstrated today. And I know exactly what is happening in this cabin and why." She paused for exactly one breath. "I have been patient. I have been cooperative. I have provided documentation. I have watched your colleague accuse me of fraud in front of a full first-class section with no evidentiary basis and no written policy to support the request." Another breath. "I know my rights." Brett said nothing. Diana picked up her phone. Camille's voice came through immediately. She had been on the line this whole time. "Camille." "Here," Camille said. "Full activation. Now." A pause of less than 2 seconds. "Copy," Camille said. "Systems are live. Do you want me to loop in legal or handle internally?" First, Diana looked at Brett. She looked at Rachel standing in the galley entrance. She looked at Sandra, who had finally fully looked up from her tablet. Both, Diana said. The word fell into the cabin like something being set into place. Diana closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. The length of a breath held and released. The length of a door closing and the lock turning over. Behind her eyelids, she was 28 years old and sitting across a desk from a man named Gerald Foster at a bank in downtown Atlanta. The room was wood-paneled. It smelled like recycled air and old paper. There was a small plant on the windowsill that needed watering. She had her business plan on the table between them. Black folder, clean print. 47 pages, every number, sourced every projection supported by market data she had spent 4 months gathering. She had memorized the document. Not performed memorization. Genuine memorization, the kind where you can open to any page in your head and read it where the numbers exist in your body the way music exists in a musician's hands. Gerald Foster was looking at her. He had not yet looked at the plan. She had placed it on the desk between them at the start of the meeting, and he had glanced at it the way you glance at something that will need to be dealt with eventually, but is not the point right now. He had asked her several questions about her background. She had answered them. He had written something down. He had looked at her again. He was 50-something, gray at the temples, a good suit, a wedding ring, reading glasses on the desk that he had not put on. "Ms. Owens," he said, "the aviation industry is particularly challenging for first-time operators." He said it gently. He said it with the particular care of someone who believes they are managing your expectations for your own benefit. He said it looking at her directly, which he perhaps thought was a point in his favor, that he was not looking away when he said the thing he was saying. Diana looked back at him. She slid the business plan across the desk, not pushed, slid the way you move something important with control. "Page 12, she said. "That is the market analysis for the Atlanta-Charlotte-Raleigh corridor. Page 23 is the 5-year revenue projection with 3 separate modeling scenarios. Page 38 is the fleet acquisition plan, including 2 letters of intent from current aircraft lessors." Gerald looked at the folder. He did not open it. "We'll be in touch," he said. They were not in touch. She found another way. She always found another way. 2 more bank denials. A private investor who almost said yes and then didn't. A second private investor who said yes and meant it. A loan from a credit union in Atlanta that believed in her numbers even when the larger institutions had not believed in her face. She had launched her airline. She had built it into something that employed 4,000 people and served 23 cities, and had every year for the last 6 years been rated in the top 5 for passenger satisfaction in its class. The business plan from the black folder was framed in her office. 47 pages behind glass on the wall beside the window that overlooked the Atlanta skyline. Next to it, a photograph taken on the morning of the inaugural flight. Diana standing at the gate, the plane visible through the window behind her, her hands finally still. Particularly challenging for first-time operators. 11 prior complaints. She doesn't look like. All the sentences that had never been finished. All the rooms where the air had been full of what people would not say out loud, and she had sat in the middle of it and breathed it in and converted it into something they had not anticipated. She opened her eyes. Camille was still on the line. The cabin was still around her. Brett was standing in the aisle. Rachel was in the galley doorway. The plane she had built was humming beneath her, the same hum as always, steady and mechanical and indifferent to everything happening in its first-class section. Her seat, her aircraft, her airline. She had not built it so that she could say that. She had built it so that nobody on it would ever have to fight for a seat they had paid for. She had one piece of unfinished business left. "Both," she said to Camille, and opened her eyes all the way. Rachel had radioed ahead. Diana heard it through the galley partition. Not every word, but enough. The phrase ground security was clear. The flight number. The seat number. The practiced language of someone filing an official request that they believe will be the final word on the matter. Diana waited until Rachel had finished the call. Then she picked up her phone and texted Camille one word. "Accelerate." The reply came in 4 seconds. A single checkmark. Camille was already moving. In row 4, Tomas Rivera was watching his screen. His original post, the still image of Diana in seat 1A, the economy slip visible on her tray, had been picked up by a travel accountability account with 800,000 followers. The share count had passed 22,000 in the last 8 minutes. The comments were no longer just "name the airline and is this real?" They had moved into specifics. People were tagging aviation journalists. Someone had screenshotted the flight number from Tomas's original post and cross-referenced it with the airline's real-time flight tracker. Flight 241, en route approximately 40 minutes from landing. The man in row 5 tapped his seatmate's arm and said quietly, "My wife is tracking this live. She says it is everywhere." His seatmate looked at him, then at seat 1A, then back at his seatmate. He did not say anything. He picked up his phone. Marcus Webb stood up. He had been sitting for the past several minutes in the position of a man who had been told to sit down and was recalculating. He had checked his phone. He had adjusted his cufflinks twice. He had looked at the back of Diana's seat with an expression that moved through several configurations before settling on something that resembled frustration at its most entitled. The frustration of someone who cannot understand why the world has not resolved itself according to his preferred timeline. He stood and moved to Diana's row. He did not go to the aisle. He leaned over the seat back from 2A, bringing himself into Diana's space from behind and above, and he spoke in the tone of a man who is delivering final terms. "Lady, nobody in this section thinks you are in the right here. The crew has asked you multiple times. You have held up this flight. You have created a scene." He lowered his voice in the particular way that makes the lowering itself an aggression. "Take the seat in the back. Everyone moves on with their lives. That is the reasonable outcome." The first class section went silent, not the partial silence of people trying to appear uninvolved. The complete silence of everyone making the same decision at the same moment to witness this, to be fully present for whatever happened in the next 10 seconds. Nora Okafor stood up. She rose from her seat across the aisle from Diana with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who has stood in a great many rooms and knows that the standing itself is information. She was 55 years old. She was not tall. She did not need to be. She looked at Marcus Webb. "Sit." "Down." 2 words, spoken at a conversational volume, the weight of 25 years on a federal bench in each one. Not as a threat, not as a performance, but as the simple statement of someone who has spent a career being the clearest person in a room and has never once needed to shout to accomplish it. Marcus Webb blinked. He sat down. The woman in row 3 began to clap. Once, twice. Not a roar, not a cheer. Deliberate, measured applause, the kind that means something specific. The man in row 5 joined. Then the man in row 6. Then someone behind them. 4 people, then 5, then 6. Quiet and purposeful, the sound of people choosing a side in the only way they had available to them. In the galley doorway, Elena Vargas stood holding a stack of napkins she had just restocked. She did not applaud. She could not professionally, and she understood that. But she stood up straighter. Her shoulders went back. Her chin lifted slightly, and she looked at Diana's seat with the expression of someone who has made the right choice and is only now in this moment feeling the full weight of what right choices cost and what they are worth. Sandra Pierce moved. She walked to Rachel. She held the tablet out screen facing up at an angle that made the display unavoidable. "Rachel." Her voice was low. It was not a whisper. Quiet, but not concealed. "It's verified. It's been verified the whole time. 0 flags. Full fare. 6 weeks prior purchase." Rachel looked at the screen. The cabin could not read what was on the screen from their distance, but they could read Sandra's posture. They could read the fact that she had walked to Rachel and turned the tablet and said something in a voice that carried the quality of someone who has waited too long to say it. Rachel looked at the booking record. Her face did something complicated. The expression of a person looking at information that contradicts a position they have been holding for 90 minutes in front of a cabin of witnesses while a live camera recorded everything. She said, "There may have been a system update." Diana had heard all of it. From the moment Sandra walked over to Rachel, she heard the words verified. She heard 0 flags. She heard the whole time. She closed her book. The sound of it closing was quiet, but in that particular silence it carried. She folded her hands on the cover. She looked at Brett, at Rachel, at Sandra, at Marcus Webb, who was sitting very still in seat 2A with the expression of a man reassessing terrain. There was no system error, Diana said. Her voice was the same voice she had used at the beginning of this flight when Rachel had first stood over her and told her to gather her things. The same pitch, the same pace, the same absolute, terrible calm. There was a judgment error. And now everyone on this plane knows it. Rachel's mouth opened, closed. Brett looked at Sandra's tablet. He looked at it the way a person looks at something that explains why they have been standing on the wrong side of a line for an hour. His face went through a private and not particularly comfortable series of adjustments. Diana reached into her canvas tote. She removed a single business card, small plane-heavy cardstock. She placed it face down on the tray table on top of her booking confirmation next to Camille's still-running call. She did not flip it over. She looked at the 3 pieces of paper on her tray table. The reassignment form, Brett had produced her booking confirmation, the card face down in the center, and then looked up at the first-class section. Now, she said, "Let us talk about what happens next." Diana picked up the business card. She did not flip it over for the cabin. She did not hold it up. She turned to Brett Calloway and placed it in his hand with the careful precision of someone who has been waiting for the exactly right moment to make exactly this move and has arrived at it. Brett looked at the card. His expression went through 3 distinct phases in the span of 4 seconds. The first was professional attention, the face of a man reading a document that has been presented to him. The second was recalibration, the face of a man whose understanding of the room has just changed in a way he is still processing. The third was something harder to name, the particular private expression of someone realizing that the story they believed they were in was a different story from the beginning. The card read, Diana Owens, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Altitude Airways. He looked up at her. His mouth opened, closed. "This," Diana said, "is my airline." She did not raise her voice. She stated it with the same flat, even certainty she had used for every other thing she had said on this flight. No theater, no performance, no moment of triumphant volume. A fact plainly delivered by a person who has always known it was a fact and has simply been waiting for the right moment to share it with the room. The cabin received it in a wave. Not the wave of a crowd at a sports event, quieter than that, more complex than that. The man in row 5 reached over and grabbed his seatmate's arm without looking at him. Tomas Rivera lowered his camera for half a second and then raised it again, his expression behind the lens, something between awe and the focused calm of a person watching something important and committed to not missing it. Nora Okafor closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, a private, complete singular expression of something, and then opened them again. The woman in row 3 put her hand over her mouth. Rachel Holt's face drained of color. Not dramatically, not like a film. Slowly, the way color leaves a thing when the warmth goes out of it, gradual and irreversible, and very much something you cannot undo once it has happened. She looked at Sandra. Sandra had already looked away. Diana picked up her phone. She looked at the live call display. Camille had been on the line for 53 minutes. She brought the phone up and switched it to speaker loud enough to carry through the first-class section. "Camille," she said. "Here," Camille said. Her voice was clear and composed, the voice of someone who has been waiting on the other end of a call for 53 minutes and is ready. "I need you to log the following names from Flight 2241. Rachel Holt, Lead Flight Attendant. Brett Calloway, Co-Pilot. Sandra Pierce, Flight Attendant. Marcus Webb, Passenger Seat 2A. Everything from the past 90 minutes. "Logging now," Camille said. I'm also flagging that the incident meets the threshold for mandatory review under the passenger conduct policy and the crew conduct charter. Do you want me to pull existing personnel records while I have the flight on log? Yes, Diana said. Start with Rachel Holt. A pause. The cabin was absolutely still. The hum of the aircraft was audible in a way it had not been before. The constant, indifferent background sound of a machine doing its job while everything else stopped. Camille came back. Diana, Rachel Holt has 11 prior passenger complaints filed against her in the past 4 years. 7 of those complaints specifically describe incidents involving passengers of color in premium cabins. All 11 were marked resolved. No disciplinary action on file. Diana said nothing for a moment. The number 11 sat in the air of the first-class section. Nora Okafor looked at the phone on the tray table, then at Rachel. Nora's expression did not show satisfaction. It showed something older and more tired than satisfaction, the expression of a person who has been expecting a number like 11 for a very long time and is not surprised to have arrived at it. Tomas Rivera was still filming. He would later say in an interview that this was the moment he stopped thinking about the post and started thinking about what the footage meant. Rachel found her voice. It came out smaller than any of her other voices from this flight. I was following procedure. Whose procedure? Diana said. Show me the page. Show me the line. Silence. 11 complaints. Diana continued. Her voice was still even. It had not wavered once in 93 minutes. 11 times someone sat in a seat they paid for and was made to feel like a criminal in the air. 11 times a report was filed. 11 times nothing happened. She paused. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern protected by inaction. And the people who buried those complaints are part of what I am going to fix. Marcus Webb had been very quiet for the past 4 minutes. He was a man who had walked into this cabin as someone who believed the geography of power was obvious and arranged in his favor, and the geography had shifted in a way he had not mapped. He spoke now. His voice had lost its conference room register. This is entrapment. You set this up. Diana turned to look at him. I bought a ticket, she said. I sat in my seat. I refused to move when asked to do so without cause. That is not entrapment, Mr. Webb. That is a paying customer exercising her rights. She let that sit for 1 beat. You're the person who left your seat twice to insert yourself into a conversation you had no standing in. Marcus had no answer for that. Furthermore, Camille's voice came through the speaker per the Altitude Airways passenger conduct policy. Mr. Webb's behavior during this flight constitutes harassment of a fellow passenger and interference with crew operations. He is eligible for placement on the no-fly registry. Marcus's jaw moved. You cannot. I can, Diana said. Continue, Camille. Nora Okafor stood again. She did not look at Marcus this time. She looked at Diana, then at the room, and she spoke with the precise deliberateness of a woman who is making a statement for the record because she understands how records work. My name is Nora Okafor. I am a retired federal judge, 25th District. I have been present in this cabin for the duration of this incident. I will provide a complete witness statement to any regulatory body that requests one. I observed every exchange from the initial approach at row 1 through this moment. My account is complete. She sat back down, done, stated, formal. Diana looked at her. Judge Okafor. She said it quietly, the title for the first time. Nora looked up. A slight recognition moved across her face. Diana said, I know who you are. I recognized you when I boarded. I am glad you were on this flight. So am I, Nora said. Elena Vargas stepped fully into the aisle. She had been in the galley doorway since Sandra had shown Rachel the tablet. She walked forward until she was beside Rachel's position at the front of the section, and she spoke clearly to the cabin, not to any one person. I informed Ms. Holt 40 minutes ago that the passenger in seat 1A had a verified booking with 0 flags on the transaction. Ms. Holt instructed me to step to the galley. She looked at Diana. I should have said it louder, Elena said. Diana looked at her for a long moment. Something in Diana's expression softened. Not collapsed, not performed. The small softening of a person who has been carrying something alone and just felt a hand on the shoulder. You said it, Diana said. That is what matters. Tomas Rivera set his phone down. On purpose, deliberately, he set it face down on his tray table and looked at Diana directly. I have filmed everything he said, from the moment you sat down. Every word, every exchange, every document placed on that tray. Diana looked at him. Don't delete anything. I won't, he said. Brett Calloway was standing in the aisle. He still had the business card in his hand. He was looking at it. He was a man who had walked out of a cockpit 3 times today to support a position he had never verified, and he was only now fully and inescapably arriving at what that meant. Rachel stood near the forward galley. She was not looking at the passengers. She was not looking at Diana. She was looking at the partition wall, the way people look at things that are not anything when they cannot look at what is actually in front of them. On the floor of the aisle, somewhere near row 2, was the economy reassignment slip. It had slid off Diana's tray during the earlier exchange, and nobody had picked it up. It lay there, face up, row 14, seat B, a piece of paper that had been issued with authority and now lay on the floor of a first-class cabin that belonged to the woman it had been handed to. Sandra Pierce looked at it. She bent and picked it up. She held it in both hands and did not know what to do with it. Diana watched her. You can keep it, Diana said. You will need it for the file. Diana stood up. It was the first time she had left seat 1A since before takeoff. She rose slowly, the way she did everything, without rushing, without drama. She straightened her blouse. She looked at the first-class section around her. The phones, the faces, Tomas Rivera's tray-down phone that was no longer recording, because it did not need to. Nora Okafor sitting across the aisle with the quiet attention of someone bearing formal witness. She looked at Brett Calloway first. He was still in the aisle, business card in hand, in the physical posture of a man who no longer knows where he belongs in this space. Captain Calloway, Diana said. You entered this cabin 3 times today. On each occasion you sided with your crew member without reviewing a single document. You did not ask to see the manifest. You did not ask what the specific discrepancy was. You issued a formal written reassignment notice for a passenger without having verified whether the reassignment had any factual basis. She paused. You had both the authority and the responsibility to ask the right questions at the beginning. You asked none of them. Brett's jaw was set. I was acting on information provided by... I know what you were acting on, Diana said. Effective upon landing, you are suspended from flight command pending a full conduct review. Camille is filing with flight operations now. Brett went still. He looked at the card in his hand. Then he turned and walked back toward the cockpit, slowly, with the diminished posture of a man returning to a space that no longer feels like command. Diana turned to Rachel. She took her time. There was no theatrical delay, just the natural pace of someone who has something specific to say and is going to say it completely. Ms. Holt, today you told a passenger that her payment was potentially fraudulent. You said this in front of a full first-class section with no written policy to support the claim and no evidence to back it. You produced a false reassignment form. You instructed a junior crew member who came to you with correct information to step aside and say nothing. She paused. You have 11 prior complaints in your personnel file. 7 of those complaints involve passengers of color in premium cabins. Not one resulted in disciplinary action. Today I saw with my own eyes what those 11 complaints described. Rachel was very still. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her face was composed in the careful way of someone holding a position that is costing them significant effort. Those complaints were reviewed, she said. They were marked resolved, Diana said. That is not the same thing, and we will find out who was signing off on them. She let that land. Then, your employment with Altitude Airways is terminated effective immediately. You will be escorted from this aircraft by ground staff upon landing. Camille, please log the termination and initiate the separation process. Logged, Camille said. Separation notice generated. HR will have documentation ready at the gate. Rachel did not erupt. She did not argue, did not cry, did not speak. She walked to the jump seat at the front of the first-class section and sat down. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at nothing. A specific nothing, the careful non-engagement of a person who has run out of positions to hold and is now simply enduring. It was somehow more complete than an outburst would have been. Diana looked at Sandra Pierce. Sandra was holding the economy reassignment slip in both hands. She had been holding it since she picked it up from the floor. Her eyes were down. Sandra. You were aware that the booking was verified before the fraud accusation was made. The manifest was open on your tablet. You saw the record. You did not show it to Ms. Holt, and you did not speak. Diana paused. You are not terminated today, but you are placed on formal review. You will submit a written statement documenting everything you witnessed from your first involvement in this incident through this moment. Camille will send the form. Sandra nodded once. She was crying. Not loudly, not as a performance. The quiet release of someone who has been holding something too heavy for too long and has just been given permission to set it down. She did not look for sympathy in Diana's face. She did not ask for absolution. She just nodded, and the tears ran down her face, and she stood there holding a piece of paper that represented the worst of what she had allowed herself to be today. You can start the statement on the ground, Diana said. Tonight if you can, while it is fresh. Sandra said, Yes, I will. Diana crossed the aisle. Marcus Webb was in seat 2A. He had not stood since Nora had told him to sit, and he had not spoken since Diana had identified herself. He was a man whose authority in this space had been entirely a product of his own assumption of it, and the assumption had been dismantled piece by piece in front of an audience that had been filming since before he boarded. Diana stood before him. She did not sit. She did not lean on the seat back. She stood in the aisle and looked at him directly the way she had looked at everything today. Mr. Webb, you are a passenger. I do not have the authority to terminate your employment because you do not work for me. She paused. But I do have the authority to determine who flies on my aircraft. Effective today, you are permanently banned from all Altitude Airways flights and partner routes. Camille, please add Marcus Webb to the no-fly registry. Seat 2, a flight 224, full documentation attached. Done, Camille said. Ban is registered. His ticket for the return flight has been canceled and a refund issued. Marcus opened his mouth. I can, Diana said, preempting him. I just did. She looked at him for one more moment, not with contempt, with the even clear final regard of someone who has placed something into the record and is satisfied that it is there. I hope the next airline you choose has the policies you seem to prefer. She turned away from him before he could speak. She looked at Elena Vargas. Elena was standing in the galley doorway, still and straight. The trembling in her hands was gone. She had the particular composure of someone who has been through the worst of something, and found that they are still standing on the other side of it. Diana walked to her. Not formally. She crossed the space between them and stood in front of her and looked at her directly. Elena. You told the truth when it was dangerous to do so. You told it clearly and professionally, and when you were pressured to stay quiet, you found a way to say it again. Diana paused. That is not a small thing. That is exactly what I built this airline to reward. She held Elena's gaze. Effective upon landing, you are promoted to senior lead attendant. Full compensation adjustment route priority of your choosing, and a formal commendation placed in your personnel file. She paused again. I also want you on the internal review panel, the one that is going to look at every one of those 11 complaints. I want a flight attendant on that panel. I want it to be you. Elena's chin lifted. She did not cry. She did not thank Diana extravagantly or collapse with relief. She simply lifted her chin and stood a little straighter, and the expression on her face was the expression of a person who made the right choice and is only now being fully permitted to know it. Yes, Elena said. I would be honored to serve on that panel. Good, Diana said. And then quieter. You did well today. Diana turned to face the first class section. She did not move to the front, did not take a position of performance. She simply stood in the aisle where she had been standing and addressed the passengers directly without a microphone, without theatrics, in the same voice she had used for everything else. I want to speak to you for a moment, not as the CEO of this airline, as someone who sat in that seat for 90 minutes and was told in a dozen different ways that she did not belong there. The cabin was completely still. Many of you have sat in a moment like this before, Diana said. On this airline or another, or in a building or a room or a space that someone decided you had no right to occupy. And very often nobody said anything. Not because they did not see it, but because saying something costs something, and most of us have learned to protect what we have. She looked at the woman in row 3 who had kept her coffee cup in her hand and her eyes forward. The woman met her gaze and did not look away. Today some of you said something. Some of you stood up. Some of you kept filming when it would have been easier to put the phone down. She looked at Tomas Rivera, who nodded once. And one member of my crew told the truth when it would have been much easier and much safer not to. I am sorry this happened on my airline. I am sorry it took a CEO sitting in the wrong seat for anyone to see it clearly. That is something we are going to fix. Not with a policy document, not with a press release, but with real changes to how complaints are received, reviewed, and acted on. She looked around the first class section one more time. This flight lands in 35 minutes, Diana said. We land as a different airline than we took off as. I promise you that. She walked back to seat 1A. She sat down. She opened her novel, found her page. She did not read. But she held the book, and the holding of it was its own kind of statement. The quiet, ordinary action of a person who has done what needed to be done and is now simply present in the space that has always been hers. 35 minutes. The seatbelt sign remained off. The sky outside was the same pale blue it had been, indifferent and clean, unchanged by everything that had happened in the cabin below it. The plane hummed its mechanical hum. The ordinary sounds of a flight in its final approach phase began to reassert themselves. The distant adjustment of engines. The faint pressurization change that told experienced travelers their ears would need to pop. But nothing inside the cabin was ordinary. It was the specific not ordinariness of a room, after something large has moved through it, when people are sitting in the same seats they have always occupied, but the air between them is different. Tomas Rivera picked up his phone from the tray table. He had made a decision during Diana's address to the cabin, and he sent a text to his editor before doing anything else. Calling you from the gate. Need to talk before I post the video. Whole story matters, his editor replied in 40 seconds. Call me. Tomas looked at the video on his phone. 94 minutes of footage continuous from the moment Diana had told Rachel, "This is my seat." He would post it. But not yet. He wanted Diana to know it was coming, and he wanted the context to be right. He texted Elena through the crew request system, the only way he had to reach her, with a simple message: "Please let Ms. Owens know I would like her confirmation before I post the full video. I will respect her answer either way." Elena read the message in the galley. She walked to row 1 and quietly relayed it to Diana. Diana did not look up from her book immediately. She held the page for a moment thinking. Then she said, "Tell him to post everything. Don't edit anything out." Elena relayed the message. Tomas nodded, looked at his phone, and pressed upload. The full video was live in 4 minutes. By the time the seatbelt sign came on for landing, it had been shared 47,000 times. The tag the travel accountability account had used, "Flight owns her seat," was climbing in the trending lists. The comments were running fast, and then faster, the compressed digital equivalent of words spreading through a crowd. In row 5, the man who had texted his wife looked at his screen. She had sent him the trending tag and a message. "The whole world is watching this. Who is she?" He typed back, "She owns the airline." A pause. Then his wife. "Of course she does." Passengers began to talk to each other. Not all of them, not loudly. The cabin had a quality of decompression to it now, the careful quiet of people processing something large. But conversations were happening, the kind that happen after shared events when the adrenaline has moved into something more reflective. The man in row 6 told the woman beside him that he had filed a complaint with a different airline 3 years ago about how he had been treated when trying to access an airport lounge. The complaint had gone nowhere. He had assumed that was how it worked. He was reconsidering that assumption. The woman in row 3 introduced herself to Nora Okafor across the seat back. Her name was Carol Rice. She was a high school teacher from outside Phoenix. She said she had not planned to say anything when Marcus Webb had spoken, but once she had started, she had found she could not stop. Nora said that was often how it went. They talked for the rest of the descent. Rachel sat in the jump seat at the front of the cabin. She did not move for 35 minutes. She did not look at the passengers. She did not serve a drink, did not make an announcement, did not perform any of the functions of her role. She sat with her hands in her lap and her gaze fixed on a point on the forward wall, and she was very, very quiet. The particular quiet of someone who has arrived at the end of something and is sitting inside the arrival. Sandra was in the galley. She had found a pen and had already begun writing, not the formal statement. That would come on the ground with Camille's form. Something more immediate than that, handwritten on a piece of notepaper from the galley supply drawer. A private accounting that no one but her could see. She did not know why it felt necessary. She only knew that she had been carrying something since the moment she had first opened the manifest and seen the zero flags, and that the carrying was now done, and that whatever came next would be more honest than what had come before. Elena Vargas worked the final service pass alone. Rachel and Sandra were both out of rotation, which meant the last 35 minutes of the flight was Elena's. She moved through the first class section with the efficiency she had always had, and something slightly different underneath it. Not changed efficiency, but perhaps more purposeful. She refilled Nora's water without being asked. She brought the woman in row 3 a second coffee before the descent made it impossible. When she reached Tomas Rivera, she paused. "He says thank you," she said. "For the text, for asking first." Thomas looked at her. "That's how it should work," he said. Elena nodded. She continued down the row. Marcus Webb looked at his phone. The no-fly confirmation had arrived in his email 11 minutes after Camille had registered it. A clean formal notification with an Altitude Airways header and his name and a single sentence stating that he had been permanently removed from the airline's approved passenger list. He stared at it for a long time. The plane hummed beneath him. He was still on this flight. He would land and disembark and collect his luggage. But the return flight he had planned was gone, and the assumption he had carried onto this plane, the assumption that certain spaces belonged to him and not to certain other people, had been stripped of its invisibility. He did not speak again for the remainder of the flight, Brett Calloway landed the plane. He did it well, smoothly, professionally, with the physical precision of a man who has 28 years of landings in his hands and whose hands do not forget. The wheels touched the runway with the clean, definitive contact of a skilled approach. The cabin absorbed the impact and the engines pulled back, and the aircraft slowed along the tarmac in the ordinary way of landings. Diana felt the wheels connect. She kept her book open in her lap. She thought very briefly with the involuntary fairness that has always been part of her character. He flies better than he leads. It was a complicated thought. She did not resolve it. She let it sit in the complicated place where complicated things sit. Elena set a glass of water on Diana's tray. Room temperature. Set it there without a word, without an order, without being asked. She simply placed it and moved on. Diana looked at the water. She looked at Elena's back moving away through the aisle. "Thank you," she said. It was 2 words for the water, and also for everything else. Elena did not turn around, but her stride for just a half step carried the slight adjustment of someone who has heard something they needed to hear. Nora Okafor leaned slightly across the aisle as the plane came to a full stop at the gate. She looked at Diana with the clear, unhurried regard of a woman who has spent a long time watching people and knows when she has watched something that will remain with her. "You know," Nora said, "in 25 years on the bench, I saw a great many people fight for what was right. Most of them were angry. Rightfully so." She paused. "You were never angry." Diana looked at her. "I was always angry," she said quietly. "I have been angry since I was 24 years old." She held Nora's gaze. "I just learned that anger is more useful when you don't let anyone see it spending you." Nora held her gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "We already have." The boarding door opened. Arizona Heat moved into the cabin. 2 ground crew members in Altitude Airways uniforms stepped aboard, the ones who had been dispatched to the gate when Camille filed the termination notice. They spoke briefly with Elena, who nodded and led them to the jump seat where Rachel sat. Rachel stood. She straightened her jacket, an automatic professional gesture, the kind of thing that the body does when the mind has gone somewhere else. She walked down the aisle without looking at the passengers. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke. The silence was the verdict, and it was enough. The passengers watched her go. Then they began to move, unclipping seatbelts, opening overhead bins, the ordinary sounds of disembarkation resuming their ordinary rhythm. Diana sat until most of the first-class section had cleared. Then she picked up her canvas tote, tucked her novel inside it, and stood. She walked up the aisle. At the galley, she paused. Elena was restocking cups. She looked up. She looked. Diana said nothing. She simply held Elena's gaze for 1 moment, long enough to be intentional, short enough to be private. Then she walked off the plane. 3 weeks later, Altitude Airways published a full internal review of every passenger complaint filed against premium cabin crew in the previous 5 years. Diana had ordered every file pulled personally. Not the summary reports, not the categorized abstracts, every original submission, every email, every gate agent notation, every letter handwritten or typed by passengers who had taken the time to document what had happened to them and had received, in most cases, a form response and silence. 42 incidents were reopened. 19 crew members were placed on formal review. The full findings were made public unredacted on the airline's website and submitted simultaneously to the relevant regulatory bodies. Elena Vargas took her seat on the 4-person equity panel as its youngest member and only active flight attendant, and in her first week she drafted the formal definition of what had been until then an informal and unwritten instruction. The practice of downgrading complaints from passengers of color in premium cabins, which had been passed between crew members in break rooms and galley conversations for years without ever appearing in any document. She named it. She documented it. She recommended it be eliminated by name in the new conduct charter, and the panel voted unanimously to adopt the recommendation. Tomas Rivera's footage became the most watched aviation accountability video in the recorded history of social media, not because it was dramatic in the way that most viral content is dramatic, but because it was quiet. 94 minutes of a woman sitting in a seat she had paid for, refusing to leave it, not once raising her voice or losing composure while the people around her gradually revealed the assumptions they had not known they were operating on. Nora Okafor submitted her witness statement to the Aviation Authority. 14 pages written with the precision of 25 years on the federal bench, noting every exchange, every time stamp, every word spoken in her hearing. Marcus Webb's private equity firm issued a careful internal memo within 3 weeks, distancing itself from his conduct. He did not fly Altitude Airways again or any of its partners. Sandra Pierce submitted her statement within 48 hours of landing, requested a transfer to ground operations, and received it. Brett Calloway's suspension was extended after the review panel found evidence that he had signed off on 2 of Rachel Holt's prior complaint resolutions without reading the original filings. He did not return to Flight Command. On the morning the review was published, Diana flew Flight 2241 again. Same route, same seat. She brought the same canvas tote and the same worn paperback, which she still had not finished. Elena Vargas was working the flight. When Diana came through the boarding door, Elena was near the front of the cabin, clipboard in hand, and she looked up. There was a moment between them, brief, unceremonious, containing everything. Elena did not say anything formal or full of significance. She said, "Good morning," and she said it the way that greeting is supposed to be said, with nothing attached to it. No condition embedded in it, no silent assessment of whether the person standing in front of her had the right kind of luggage, or the right kind of face, or the right kind of anything. Just good morning. As if Diana's presence in this space were the most ordinary and expected thing in the world, because it was. Diana settled into seat 1A. She opened her book. Outside the window, the tarmac caught the early light and held it for a moment before the plane began to move. She felt the aircraft lift, the familiar pause between ground and sky, the instant when the wheels release their hold on the earth, and everything that has been heavy becomes briefly weightless. The plane climbed. The city fell away below them. She looked out at the sky, which was the same pale blue it always was at this hour, indifferent and clean and very wide. Hers. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, in the air, on the ground, and everywhere in between, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We tell stories like this one every week, stories about people who refused to be invisible, who knew their worth when others tried to take it from them, and who changed something because they did not walk away. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been in a moment where you had to fight for something that was already yours? This community is listening. We will see you in the next story.